Music and Society Channel. Music, social science, art. Didn't you know a better world is possible?
Every society can produce so much, and they can kind of decide what they want to produce, and then they can figure out who gets what. And that's pretty much what an economy is. Profit is not working and making money, not getting paid for your work. That's not what profit is. Profit is the amount above what your work is worth, or your investment is worth, that you get a return on. If you invested $1,000 and you got $1,000 back, there's no profit, you broke even, right? So profit is what beyond that. And that's not assuming your work, because if you're, own your own small business and you put $1,000 in and you work and you get $1,000 back, you're actually at a loss because you worked. You didn't get paid for your work. So you'd have to get, whatever the wage for the work you're doing on top of the $1,000, and that still won't be a profit. Profit is on top of that. On top of after you pay all your expenses, including labor, what you have left.
As soon as you're born, they make you feel small.
Here's the thing, though. The only thing that adds value to the economy is work. Sitting home and, putting money into someone's company, I'm not adding any value into that. I'm not making that money into any more money. So you got to think about that. The only thing that adds value to the economy is work. In the United States, who do we tax? We tax the workers at a much higher rate than what they call the investor class or the capitalist class. Those are people who have, money that they don't need immediately, that they can invest and give some time to seeing a return. And they're taxed at a much lower rate. So what that means is that it's a rigged game. It's a rigged game.
By giving you no time instead of it all.
Really understand this. You got to go back to Martin Luther. Not Martin Luther King, but Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. Before the Protestant Reformation, I'm not saying this was followed at all, but the Catholic Church had an idea that you're supposed to pay people what's called a just wage, like fair, like a justice. A wage that does them justice, So basically, you should be paying them the value of their work.
Till the pain is so big you feel nothing at all.
That brings us to a little concept called exploitation. Now, some people use exploitation pretty loosely, but when you're talking about economics, it has a very specific meaning. Exploitation is the difference between the actual value of your work and what you get paid for your work. So it can be a lot, it can be a little. Theoretically, if you had a just wage, a fair wage, it'd be little, if not just none.
They hurt you at home and they hit you at school.
And actually back then, they didn't, if you lent somebody money and you asked for more money back than you lent it, it was not called interest, which has been completely normalized in our culture. It was called usury, and usury was a sin, according to the Catholic Church. So you couldn't have the development of capitalism without the Protestant Reformation, unless the Catholic Church was going to change its doctrine, which I don't think they were really discussing that. I don't think that was. Weber first observes a correlation between being Protestant and being involved in business, and declares his intent to explore religion as a potential cause of the modern economic condition. He argues that the modern spirit of capitalism sees profit as an end in itself, and pursuing profit is as virtuous. So, if you think about it, the way that you can increase your wealth and be a richer person, which, according to the doctrine of blessings, is the sign that you're, godly. The easiest ways you can do that is through increasing your exploitation rate and paying your workers less, so that you get more, you get a higher percentage of the value of their work, which is kind of like stealing from them, really. And second, you can charge more interest when you loan money out, and take advantage of the people that way. It's interesting that you had to invent this whole school of religion, Protestantism, in order to justify basically ripping people off in order to serve the interest of the businessmen, the owner class. So, just think about that for a second. It doesn't make sense, but people just follow it. But they're not just thinking on the basic level of what the Bible says versus what capitalism is and how capitalism works. So, at the end of the day, the reality is capitalism and Christianity are not compatible. We have a Christian capitalist nation, and those two ideas, those two ideologies, ultimately they're not compatible. And so we're just living in this huge cognitive dissonance, because you can't have both. That's why you see weird things like working class people supporting the interests of billionaires, because they're going to these churches, and that's what they're being told. They need to fight for their own wage, a living wage, a just wage, which to me is a more godly wage. People receiving what they deserve. Doesn't that sound a little more, right?
Now, to me, it's the furthest thing from what is actually in the New Testament that it possibly could be. But the majority of Americans are Protestants. They probably don't think about this. They just go to church and hear, the stories and the songs and do all that. But the whole religion looks to me, historically, like a justification to hurt, exploit people, use people, enslave them, genocide, take them away from their families, put them in school. All these destructive things that people have done because they're spreading the word of God.
Yep.
That's the justification.